The way I look at this is because quite simply there are so many users, so many identities, and identities are essentially the new perimeter of an enterprise network in 2024. When we think of a network for 15 to 20 years ago, we would have said a firewall or VPN appliance or something like that would be the perimeter device on your network. It would be the perimeter of your enterprise. Nowadays, it's all identity. Your identities are used in SaaS applications, email, file storage, everything like that. And they're all being used in various ways. They're all being used in various users, and users will use them on all sorts of different devices. You'll have users using identities on mobile devices, laptops, desktops, everywhere under the sun that they can do them. And they have their passwords stored in weird ways. They have their passwords stored in web browsers, all sorts of different things. So all of these are exposure points where an identity can be compromised. In addition, there's also a proliferation of phishing kits, new tools, new things where adversaries can make very realistic looking logon pages. They can imitate very common brands. They can imitate your company's brand. And it's not fear-mongering. Quite literally, we have seen organizations have an entire tech support site for their organization be mirrored by an adversary so that they can figure out ways to compromise users' identities. They're a hot commodity. They're a hot target going into the new year.
I kind of think there are three fundamental reasons that organizations are struggling to secure their user identities. The first is implementation. The second is permissions, and the third is alerts. So just to expand on those a little bit, it is non-trivial to implement secure identities across an entire organization. Sure, there's a lot of solutions that exist. A lot of them are understood and well known about, but that doesn't make it any less complicated. And one example I really like for this is thinking through MFA, right? So you can tell someone you have to use multifactor authentication, but how do you enforce that across all of the different accounts, all of the different logins across an organization? And then there are some organizations that exist in a space where that's inherently tricky, right? So think about like a retail location where multiple employees are using a shared account at a shared point of sale device to log in. How do you use MFA for that, right? Like also at the same time, if you're using MFA, are you giving out phones to all of your employees? Are you expecting them to use their own phones? Are you sure that your employees even have their own phones or have the technical acumen to go and use multi-factor authentication? So there's plenty of challenges in the implementation space, and those were just some really simple examples of it. Now, on the permissions side, this is probably even more complicated. So you have to understand for any given tool what any given permission set means. And then you have to be able to track those permissions across all of your different users. You have to be able to configure those permissions correctly. And you have to be able to understand who has what permissions and who should have what permissions. And then the last and probably the most simple of all of these is just alerts. If you look at a lot of these identity providers, they'll generate alerts when they think that a login is suspicious based on some criteria they use to determine that. So some of the most famous ones from Microsoft are like impossible logins because of there's two logins happening at once and geographically distinct in separate locations. Or maybe someone's logging in through a VPN, or maybe someone's logging in and it seems like they've done some sort of impossible travel, right? They were logged in on the East Coast here a few minutes ago, and then they logged in on the West Coast. So these kinds of rules sound fine, but we know from practice that they generate a lot of false positives just based on the way people work, right? A lot of people are working remote. A lot of people are mobile while they're working. Some people are logging in via VPNs, some of which are sketchy and some of which aren't. So those are kind of some of the fundamental reasons why I think that a lot of organizations are struggling with identities, and reasonably so.